Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel General Hospital today. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Jason Morgan's palm felt unusually cold against the hospital room door's polished oak. He took note of the detail, a sensory input to be processed and stored away, a brief diversion from the raging tempest beyond. This was unfamiliar, unfriendly land for a man whose existence was a carefully planned list of threats, plans, and definite actions. There were no plans for this, no adversary to destroy, and no agreement to negotiate. All that was left was a door, and behind it was the dim light of the lady who had been his mother, his confidant, and his fulcrum in all the important ways. The graceful, strong matriarch of the Quartermain dynasty, Monica Quartermain, was near death. After being fought with every weapon in medicine's vast arsenal, the cancer, a cunning and deadly foe, had finally prevailed. The battle was over. The silence was all that was left. Jason opened the door with a push. Long golden shadows striped the white sheets and pastel walls as the gentle, late afternoon glow poured through the slatted blinds and filled the room. The cardiac monitor's steady, repetitive beep had slowed, a solemn metronome marking the end of a life filled with intense love and powerful strength. Antiseptic and the subtle, well-known aroma of Monica's lavender hand cream filled the air. She appeared smaller and more frail than Jason had ever seen her, supported up on pillows. She was a lively woman, but the sickness had chipped her away, leaving only a fragile outline of who she used to be. However, even the unrelenting approach of death was unable to completely extinguish the distinct Quartermain fire that remained in her eyes when they fluttered open at the sound of his arrival. Her voice was a faint, raspy echo of its normal assertive tone as she said, "Jason." Her lips split into a tiny smile. "You arrived." "Of course I came," he answered in a gravelly, low voice that was full of a passion he hardly ever let show. He took a few steps across the room and drew the visitor's chair near her bed. With a softness that would surprise anyone who knew only his reputation, his big, rough palm encircled her weak, four-taped one. "Monica, I'm here. Here I am." For a short while they sat in the same kind of cozy, knowing silence that had always surrounded them. They had mastered the language over many years, and their link was not based on biology but rather on loyalty, choice, and a common past of suffering and salvation. The mob's feared agent, Sonny Corinthos's enforcer, was the wounded youngster Monica had seen, the good man hidden deep within. She only ever saw Jason, her son, and never the stone-cold character. Furthermore, Mom had given him a North Star in her unshakable faith, a moral compass that frequently led him to a truth that was more straightforward and innocent than the brutal world he lived in. With a little catch in her throat, Monica started. "The others. They've all passed, Edward, Alan, etc. said what they had to say. Most of the words were too many. Outside, your brother is a complete mess." She was referring to Ned and the finality of this farewell when she said, couldn't do this again. However, you always performed better in silence than in speeches." Jason just nodded and gave her hand a light squeeze. He was not a talkative man. Action, protection, and presence were the words he used. And the most poetic expression of love he could possibly give was his presence here, right now. Monica's eyes strayed to the window, where she could see a small portion of the Port Charles skyline between the buildings. She regained some of her former vigor and responded, "I'm not afraid, you know. It's an interesting phenomenon. I've battled my entire life for my marriage, my kids, my dignity, and my place in that absurd family. And now, the battle is over. Simply peace." Returning her attention to him, she searched his face, learning the lines of concern and determination engraved there. "Jason, you've carried so much. A lot of weight. For Sonny. For Carly. For Michael. For everybody." She hesitated, sapping her waning energy. "You've been the most resilient. The stone. However, persistent pressure causes even rocks to erode." Jason's mouth clenched. He wanted to argue, to let her know he was all right, that the burden was on him, that it didn't matter. He couldn't deceive her though. Not in this place. Not right now. Monica's palm tightened almost imperceptibly as she said, "I need you to promise me something." "Anything," Jason said without doubt or delay. Right now there was nothing he wouldn't give her. One tear trickled out of the corner of her eye and made its way across her temple's delicate lines. The oxygen cannula hummed quietly in her nose as she inhaled slowly and shallowly. The interval between the beeps on the cardiac monitor was slightly longer. She poured all of her remaining life power into this last vital message, as she stared straight into his eyes with a clear and focused gaze. Even though her voice was quiet, it was steady, each syllable measured and exact. A purposeful arrow pointed straight at the center of his being. Assure me that you will make your own decision. 5 words. 5 words that hurt my heart. Simple in their design but devastating in their message. They hung in the barren air between them. They were more than simply a request to a man who had based his entire identity on self-abnegation, and the idea that his life was an instrument to be used for the benefit and protection of others. They were revolutionary. They were a condemnation of his whole life. Make your own decision. The statements, which went against the core principles of his code, reverberated in the quiet room of his head. Selfishness led him to choose himself. He could not afford the luxury of choosing himself. Others might suffer as a result of his decision. By choosing himself, he might let Michael down and disappoint Sunny, leaving Carly to deal with her upheaval on her own. His usefulness was what made him valuable. His sacrifice was his reason. Selecting oneself meant becoming nothing. Monica saw the instantaneous instinctual flinch, the battle raging behind his blue eyes. She had anticipated its presence. No one knew the man she was talking to as well as she did. No, she said in a gentle yet forceful whisper, not allowing him to back down. Pay attention to me. Pay attention. You have lived your whole life, your whole second life, being the person that other people needed you to be. The faithful companion. The merciless guardian. The heartless policeman. You have taken on their responsibilities, fought their battles and cleaned up their mess. You've allowed them to define, exploit, and depend on you to the point that nearly little of the man I know remains. The exertion cost her as she gasped for air. The man who cherishes his son above all else. The man who constructs Jake castles, reads to him, and gazes at him with awe that is unrelated to the world you work in. When Alan died, the man who sat by my bedside for a week and didn't say a thing, just simply was there. That individual. You are that person. Not the weapon that everyone sees. Jason's throat tightened with an anguish more severe than any gunshot wound he had ever experienced as he gazed down at their connected hands. He had never ventured to investigate the truth she was expressing, a secret agreement he had made with his own life the day he awoke from the coma as Jason Morgan. She whispered, Jason, they'll all be fine. Sunny will never stop looking for a crisis. Every time, Carly will land on her feet. Like you, they are survivors. However, you managed to survive by refusing to rely on anyone, and they managed to survive by relying on you. It can't be sustained. It isn't alive. Simply enduring. One last tear trickled down. I can't leave this world. I can't leave you. I know you'll try. That you'll ask Jason what he wants for once. Not what Carly wants, not what Sunny needs, and not what the company needs. What are you looking for? What brings you joy? Is it the violence? The perpetually on guard state? Or is it the tranquility that you experience with your son? Is it the silence? Is it something completely different? Something you haven't even let yourself imagine? She let out a weak, rattling cough that shook her entire frail body. Jason leaned forward, a mask of agony covering his face. Don't save your strength, Monica. With a sorrowful yet endearing smile on her lips, she exhaled. There is no strength left to save. This is all that remains. This, my final request. The word mother dropped with the weight of a lifetime. My final command as your mother. Every unwavering act of love, every value she stood up for, and every time she stood between him and the world's judgment had earned her that distinction. Her voice faded like a far-off radio signal as she muttered, You have given everyone else a lifetime of loyalty. Now swear to me that you will give yourself a chance. An opportunity to be Jason alone. To discover a life rather than only a goal. To love to be loved. Not for your abilities but for who you are. Tell me you'll make your own decision. Even though it's only once. Make me a promise. The bleep from the cardiac monitor had changed to a steady, sluggish drum. Despite having half-closed eyes, she was waiting for his response. She was holding out for the one thing that would let her relax. Jason Morgan, a man who had courageously confronted rival mobsters, crooked police officers and drug lords, was completely afraid. It was as if she were asking him to disassemble his own skeleton. It demanded that he give up the structure that kept him together. It felt like the ultimate betrayal of everyone who relied on him to choose himself. However, he saw the love and deep care that had endured beyond death itself as he gazed into her eyes, and he understood. Others weren't betrayed in this way. Her finest and last act of love for him was this. She was granting him freedom, which was the one thing he had never allowed himself. The act of swallowing was uncomfortable. Gently, he kissed her paper-thin skin, bringing her palm to his lips. He would never let anybody else see the one rebellious tear that finally escaped and followed a path down his stony cheek. "I promise," he said, whispering the two words into the void between life and death as a sacred pledge. "I swear, Mom." He had never referred to her by that name before. Monica's features took on a deep feeling of calm. The lines of concern disappeared. Her lips regained the faint, knowing smile, a smile of complete triumph. It was her. She had sown a seed of hope in the most inaccessible part of him. She had finished her assignment. She closed her eyes completely. In his, her hand grew slack. A long, steady, flatline tone came from the cardiac monitor. The world held its breath as the room's golden glow appeared to fade. There was no sign of Monica Quartermain. Jason remained still. He sat there, gripping the hand of the woman who had just delivered a decree that threatened to tear apart his entire life with her final breath. The deep silence she had left behind was cruelly contrasted with the flatline's constant high-pitched wail. The sound was that of a conclusion. It was also the sound of a terrible, unachievable beginning, even though he was not yet able to recognize it. Nurses hurried in, their faces professionally grim, as the door flew open. His body moved automatically as he was gently pushed from the bedside. He watched the clinical, effective process of death from the corner of the room like a sentinel. They shut down the machines. The ensuing hush was deafening. He left the room, left the intensive care unit, and went down the antiseptic general hospital corridors. He was sheltered, imprisoned in a soundproof bubble of sorrow and seismic shock, while the world around him shifted in a haze of color and sound. He continued on despite passing a distraught Alan Jr., a sobbing Ned, and a composed Tracy. The Quartermain circus was starting its last show. He was unable to. He ended himself on the rooftop, where he frequently went to reflect and look over his city and territory. The noises of life and traffic from far below were carried by the wind, which whipped at his clothing. In front of him loomed Port Charles, a city he had defended and that had expected everything of him. Promise now called for even more. Assure me that you will make your own decision. Each of the 5 phrases, which were hammer blows to the statue of his life, kept repeating in his head. Even so, what did it mean? How does a man abruptly turn off such basic programming after 20 years of serving others? He felt as though he had no glossary for the strange language of choosing oneself. Was it a departure from Sunny? Leaving behind the institution that served as both his prison and his mission? The idea was unimaginable. He had a sibling named Sunny. Battle and blood bound their fates together. Did it mean abandoning Carly and their incredibly complex, mutually reliant relationship? She was his eldest friend, the mother of his child, and a never-ending storm that he felt he had to manage. Was the life of violence, the black jacket and the gun to be retired? Without that, what would he even be? An empty page? A specter? Or did it refer to something more personal, something smaller? Did it entail giving in to his desire for something personal? Love or something similar? A modest, genuine, everyday love? A hazardous and seductive ideal that he had always forced himself to repress. The image of Elizabeth and the simple, tranquil existence she symbolized flashed through his head. Was he picking himself? Seeking a bliss that was only his? The struggle hurt his chest physically. The pledge seemed to be a betrayal of Michael, Carly, and Sunny. Selecting Jason Morgan was a betrayal of those who relied on him as their pillar of support and defense. His utility was inseparable from his value. What was he if he was useless? Then he heard her voice, kind but firm. Was it accurate to say, "They will all be okay"? Or was it a lovely falsehood intended to bring him comfort, Or was it a mother's final wish? Jake was on his mind. His son. The only unadulterated love he had ever experienced. What was he modeling for him? A life of sacrifice, brutality, and emotional detachment? Did he wish to leave that legacy? Monica also mentioned Jake in her pledge. His son may live a safer, better life if he chooses a life for himself. The sky turned orange and purple as the sun started to set over the metropolis. The mayhem of the streets below appeared orderly, almost serene from this vantage point. He knew it was a delusion. The turmoil was waiting, always there. And his phone, which was currently silent in his pocket, will soon begin to ring. Sonny has a fresh issue. Carly has a new problem. The company faces a fresh danger. Every ring would represent a request, a retreat from that pledge. His promise to a deceased woman would be put to the test with each call to action. He had surrounded himself with walls so thick and high that he was imprisoned inside them. Monica had given him the key with her 5 words. However, the door had been locked for so long that he wasn't sure he could remember how to open it, or whether he had the guts to enter the unknown world beyond. For Monica, grief was a deep emptiness. On top of everything, though, was this brand new horrifying anxiety. In addition to requesting a promise, she had given him a grenade and instructed him to pull the pin on his own. The ensuing days were a dissonance study. Suppressed emotion, covert insults, and lavish floral arrangements characterized the burial at the Quartermaine estate. As always, Jason stood out against the garish background of Quartermaine luxury, a silent black shadow. With a sorrowful nod, he accepted the sympathies, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The promise became the prism through which all interactions were seen. Jason listened as Sonny called, his voice tense with tension about a cargo disagreement with the 5 families. The outdated programming begged him to organize, plan, and destroy the menace. However, another voice murmured, "Is this what you choose? More bloodshed? Greater danger?" He was there when Carly arrived at his door, crying because she had a quarrel with Jax and expected him to listen, repair it, and be her dependable ally through the storm. But he heard Monica as she spoke. "She'll always land upright." He did not instantly offer to help her with her issue, but he did provide discreet support, saying, "You survive by denying you need to lean on anyone at all." Even though it was a tiny decision, it felt like a huge change. He began hanging out with Jake more. Being present means more than simply being in the same place. Sitting in the backyard, pointing out clouds, reading books, and constructing intricate Lego buildings. He sensed a flicker of it in those seconds. He was making his own decision, because the joy he experienced with his son was for him, pure and untainted. It nourished his soul in a manner that no triumphant business deal or defeated foe could. However, the outer world continued. The demands persisted, and he experienced a sickening twinge of remorse every time he said, "No, not now," or gave a chore to someone else. His code was being betrayed. He was not keeping his promise to Carly and Sonny. He felt like he was being torn in two by the vow he made to Monica. More often than not, he found himself at her grave. It was the only instance in which the 5 sentences felt like a dialogue rather than a condemnation. He would address the icy granite headstone saying, "I'm trying." He would be met with silence. "It's more difficult than you suggested." The city appeared to respond after spotting a weakness in its staunchest protector. Old foes became brazen. There were new dangers. The pressure increased. Reverting to the old patterns would be the simple and comfortable option. To be completely icy. To serve as the remedy. To disregard the pledge in the interest of the greater good. Or at the very least, the welfare of the people he had vowed to defend. An old acquaintance who had a genuine business idea that had nothing to do with the Corinthos group approached him. A security advisory company. His knowledge, but without the violence. It was a sneak peek at an alternative route. In fact, he was thinking about it, flipping the concept around in his head. It was a decision. Possible option for himself. Then a crisis broke out. Michael found himself in the middle of a conflict that Jason had been attempting to avoid. The old impulses came up with a shout. They forgot the pledge. Did it on its own. Without hesitation, he armed himself, mobilized, and strode back into the darkness. He turned become the defense, the tool, the answer. It was his identity. He did it. The danger was eliminated. Michael was secure. Later, standing amid the ruins of the encounter, the adrenaline dwindling, he experienced a deep sense of emptiness. He had made a decision. However, he had gone the traditional route. They were his choice. He had not fulfilled his pledge. The guilt was unbearable. She had been let down by him. He had failed the first serious test, and that had been her final request. He returned to the graveyard. Even after the coma, when he was unable to recall his own identity, he had never felt more lost than he did as he stood in front of her grave. His voice was raw as he admitted to the quiet stone, "I couldn't do it." He was in danger. Michael was the one. "I had to." Adjacent oak trees' leaves rustled in the wind, and then a recollection sprang to the surface, bright and distinct. Monica sitting in the Quartermain Estates garden years ago. Back then she had said something to him that at the time had seemed unimportant. As she watched him gently mend a damaged toy for a little Michael, she had remarked, "Jason, loving someone isn't about losing yourself in them. It's about using them to become a better version of yourself. It's a delicate balance. Remember that always. Equilibrium." With the power of a revelation, the word struck him. Her final words had seemed to him like a command. Either they or you. An impossible binary decision. Perhaps it wasn't, though. Perhaps it wasn't about abandoning everyone he cared about. Perhaps it had to do with recalibrating. Perhaps it was about realizing that he didn't have to destroy himself in order to protect others. He didn't have to leave Sunny in a shootout to choose himself. However, it might entail later informing him, "I can no longer do this. We must find an alternative." Carly didn't have to be shut out if he made his own decision. Saying "I love you but I can't fix this for you" could be the alternative. You have the strength to fix it on your own. Making the decision on his own might include leveraging his abilities and reputation to create something respectable, something that would guarantee Jake a future away from the bloodshed. One day, choosing himself might mean letting himself be content with a woman who loved the man rather than the myth. There wasn't a single disastrous choice. They did it every day. 1,000 little options. It was the decision to delegate and to say no. The decision to return home to his son rather than stay and tidy up a mess that someone else had created. The decision to think he was deserving of a life rather than only a mission. The burden on his shoulders changed, but it didn't go away. Instead of crushing him, it became a weight he could bear. The promise was now a compass rather than a grenade. Although it wouldn't make the journey simple, it would always lead him to his own north. The granite beneath his palm was cool but firm as he laid it on Monica's headstone. "Now I get it," he muttered. "It's a voyage, not a place to go. I'm still making a decision. I'm still trying to." With the sun sinking behind him, he turned and left the grave. The 5 words remained, inscribed on his future as well as his heart. They would mentor him, test him, and come back to haunt him. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with difficulty and backsliding. Old habits, especially those forged in loyalty and love, die hard.